Remakes, remasters, and reboots are something that we as gamers have to face on a daily basis. We have to know what we're looking for, and we have to know what we want. And there are some things that we do want but are not getting made, and there are some things that are getting made that we don't particularly want. Dark Souls Remastered comes to mind, Final Fantasy VIII Remastered comes to mind, and Final Fantasy IX Remake. As much as I like to play the game and such, I don't want that remake to come out. But I feel like it's important to know what we're talking about. What is a remaster, reboot, and remake? Because I saw something interesting on an article, and it's a game journalist article, so of course, it's going to be wrong, like most things are. But it pertains to a particular game. A game which I can actually show you. This game right here. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. It's a fun little game, Forgotten Realms, D&D related. D&D is kind of a craze, people, it's been a craze for a long time. But it's actually getting a remaster. It's getting a remaster, and it's already out. PS4, Xbox, whatever the newest one is, I don't remember. They came out with a couple different versions. And a Nintendo Switch. Pretty amazing, right? Well, this pertains to an article I saw from PSU.com. I don't know who they are, and I don't really care anymore. So, that game you saw, PS2. I have the PS2 version. I still have a PS2. I still play that game very frequently. And whenever I saw it on PS4 on the store, I thought I was going insane. I'm like, they just ported it. Okay. No. I looked at it. It's not a port. It's a full-blown remaster. But PSU claims otherwise. PSU says, it is not a full-blown remaster. It is not a remake. I agree, it's not a remake. But it is a remaster. It very much is a remaster. A remaster is when you take a game and you increase the graphics, the sound quality, the FPS, basically just the performance of the game. This does that. And then some. It changes some of the graphics, actually. Damage numbers, for instance, they're not big and yellow. They're like big and somewhat bluish green or something like that, or big and gray, or I don't really know. I don't have the game yet, but I've seen the trailer. They're not big and yellow like they used to be. It's really weird how this is not a remaster, technically speaking. Even though Final Fantasy VIII gets to be called a remaster on PS4, this game's a remaster. Okay? We know it to be true. But why is it not a remake? If you don't know what you're talking about, or you don't really know game lingo, a remake happens in movies too, but not very often. A remake typically is when they just make it, and they make it better. But they change an aspect about it. But in games in particular, usually they change maybe the way the battle mechanics work. So for instance, Final Fantasy VII Remake, you had turn-based in the original, and now you have like this sort of real-time action sort of thing going on. Kind of like Final Fantasy 15, but not exactly like Final Fantasy 15. It's a little bit different. But other than that, the story is roughly the same, except for the end of the first episode. That's where there's a little bit of story difference, but it's not enough to consider it a reboot. A reboot takes a character, and they change the story, and they throw in their backstory instead. So, for Ratchet and Clank, Ratchet's backstory, being on Velden, is brought into it, and they change everything about the story, almost to a T. You still have one of the main villains there. You still have a betrayal. and you have, Ratchet and Clank, and they meet up. You still have that. You don't have the same story beats. Some of the things are completely different. You don't have the same weapons from the original game. You have a couple returning ones, but you don't have the same ones entirely. You do not have the same story at all. In the original Ratchet and Clank 1, they're planning on blowing up novelists for supplies, but you stop them. But in this one, they blow up novelists. Spoiler alert, they blow up novelists. I was surprised too. I'm like, holy shit, I like novelists. It's a very nice place. But yeah, I liked it for what it was. I consider it separate from the original trilogy, so that way if they ever did want to expand on the original trilogy, they still can, technically speaking. Even though it looks good, and it's an improvement, and it's not a remaster, because it's a separate game. It's a completely separate game, in fact. It's almost completely its own thing. If they weren't going for the same vague story or the same areas, people might have liked it more and they might consider it more of its own thing. But it's supposed to be a reboot. Final Fantasy IX Remaster. That one's a remaster of the original, obviously, but it first started out on mobile. So the one on PS4 is actually a port of the mobile version, which I don't like because I don't like the UI of it. But I like how accessible it is, and I consider that a little bit better than the original. I like the UI in the original a lot more. I like how there's multiplayer in the original, but they changed a couple things, like you could speed up now, you can avoid battles whenever you want to, you could do 9,999 damage all the time if you really wanted to. Fuck, you could even enter battle assistance and go in trance and never die unless, the enemy does more than you have in health, but that's rarely going to be an issue. It's pretty cool. I like it, but I barely consider it a little better than the original. Xenoblade Definitive Edition, I consider better than the original. Not just because the graphics overhaul, but the graphics overhaul is pretty nice. But I also consider it better because it is kind of a remake also, because it also throws in Future Connected, which is a continuation on the story of Xenoblade 1. But it's not Xenoblade 2, because that's its own separate entity. It's not Xenoblade X, because that's also its own separate entity. Speaking of X, man, we really don't get much into that. 2 and 1 are linked in a way, but I don't know if X is, so that's weird. That's really all I've got to say on this issue. One thing I can say before I end off this video is I think that game journalism as a whole is a dying thing. I think that people are making so many mistakes now and they're angering the fans so much to the point where it's like, how are you still up? Did you see the IGN review of Xenoblade Definitive? I wanted to puke. Like, fucking hell, man. That was bad. But I don't see a resurgence in game journalism coming back at some point. Maybe it could. Maybe there's some third-party ones that I'm not quite knowledgeable of that do a really good job. But as it stands, I would stick to YouTubers who review these games. And maybe at some point I'll get into reviewing a game. I don't know, I fucking like games. I'm a gamer, I love games. But that's another time. So, until then,